All right, guys, here we go with the next video. I think I just said it was going to be number 3, and I think it's 4. So sorry about that. I'm an idiot. It's still morning time. That's what we're going to go with. I want to talk about rear ends, shocks, and idler arms. And since I'm up front, I'll talk about the idler arm. So right here on your Tri-5 Chevy cars is your idler arm right here. It bolts to the frame right here. There's nuts on the back. You just take the nuts off. You don't have to remove these. You take the nuts off and you pull it off. And take this nut off and your castle nut with your cotter pin in it. Now if you can see that on mine, it might be kind of dark, the silver. This is an idler arm bearing conversion kit. Originally they had a rubber bushing here. There is a lot of controversy around these. I've seen on the Tri-5 forums, guys bitching and complaining about them things. They spent the money on it because they are over $100 and they didn't notice any difference. So I'll give you my 2 cents on it. I changed out my first one. It was probably, I don't even know what year it was. I'm going to say 2010, somewhere around there, 2006 maybe. I changed out from a rubber bushing. I actually replaced with a Moog bushing. Then I didn't like it then, so then I ended up trying the idler arm bearing kit, and I have put one on every car since then. I've even put quite a few of these on customer cars. Now, I will say this, if you have power steering on your Tri-5 Chevy car, I wouldn't worry about that idler arm bearing kit. You're probably not going to notice much at all. Now, if you're still running your manual steering like I do on all my cars, you will notice a difference, I promise you. And I'll give you a scenario of the reason why. So I have rebuilt them with the stock replacement bushing, and then I've started doing these bearing kits. And here's the reason why. If you take this idler arm off this frame with the 2 nuts and undo the castle nut there and pull it off, if you grab that idler arm on the arm where it bolts to the frame like that, and you pull it up out of there and you turn it upright, you basically got this big old heavy arm sticking up there with a stem on it. With a rubber bushing, if you try to spin that around like a lasso, it ain't gonna do it. It's rubber on metal. If you put that bearing kit on there, that thing will spin around like there's no tomorrow. It will spin like a helicopter blade. So I do not know why the people say they didn't notice anything, because that is less drag. And people can argue all they want. I'm just telling you from my personal experience, they do work. Now, you're not going to be able to put one finger on your steering wheel and turn it with one finger. Not going to work. But you will notice a difference. And the first car I did it on, I had 18-inch wheels on it with wide tires, and I had a little bitty 15-inch steering wheel. Manual power steering, or manual steering, not power, all manual factory steering box. I immediately noticed the difference because I drove the car every single day. So they do work, regardless of what a lot of guys gripe about. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. The other thing I'll talk about is shocks and rear ends. Since I'm up here at the front where a shock is, I'll tell you about it. When I start building a car, like back in the day when I would drag in a field car 4-door, I had a certain amount of money to spend, and I would try to buy as many parts as I could with that amount of money. So I had to cheap out and buy all the cheaper stuff so I could get more stuff. So I would go down and I would buy 4 brand new gas shocks for the chassis, and they were the house brand, cheapest ones you could get, and bolt them on. Now you're not going to notice anything because you get the car together and start driving it. You don't notice if they're not good shocks or not. So what happened to me in that case, 3 of my friends came over, grown-ass adults, and we all pile in my 4-door, and we take off down the road. We actually went on a big car hunt. We would fill up the gas tank, everybody pitch in, and we'd go get lost on back roads looking for old cars out in fields and behind people's houses and stuff. I wish we could do that again. We haven't done that in quite a few years, which I don't have the money to buy another car anyway, but it was fun. Anyway, 2 grown-ass adults in the back of that car with them old original wore-out leaf springs. That thing was squatted in the back, and it was rubbing every once in a while because I had big wheels on it. So what I did a couple weeks later was I swapped out to Monroe air shocks. And that's another thing that's controversial for a lot of older guys like myself, or maybe older than me, actually. And this is why. Basically, if you put an air shock on there and you put a bunch of luggage in, or get some big guys in the back, it's going to squat. So if you want it to stay level, you can adjust it with air pressure, from your air compressor to get away with it. Now, this is why they got a bad rap. I can remember when I was a kid, my older brothers had muscle cars and hot rods. Well, back in the late 70s and 80s, it was popular to put air shocks on your hot rod and max the PSI out with everything it would take, which I want to say it was like 100 PSI. they would max them suckers out to jack the ass end up. And I remember my dad saying, jacked up in the back like a monkey humping a football. So that's what you can think of there. But anyway, when you max out an air shock, obviously the car is going to ride like a lumber wagon. It's going to be a really rough ride. But what a lot of people may not know, you only need to put like 15 PSI or 20 in there, and it was awesome ride quality versus the gas replacement shock that I took off. I immediately noticed a difference with just 15 to 20 PSI in there. I was amazed, absolutely amazed. That's why if you've ever watched some TV shows and they do airbags on their cars to lower them and stuff, and they get them up like mid-height for drivability, and they talk about how smooth the ride is. And also, Lincoln and Cadillac and a lot of them companies, they would do airbag suspensions on their cars. And that's why you get a smoother ride. But I can tell you this, the more air you put in an air shock, the worse it's going to ride. But I can tell you for a fact that low air pressure, you will be amazed. So after I learned that on my daily driver, after learning how nice of a ride I got out of that, a couple weeks later, I swapped out them cheap front shocks to the higher end Monroe Gas Shocks. They offer a couple of different lines of Monroe. I went with their highest ones they had, and I did notice a difference out of that. It wasn't as much of a shock noticeability as the air shocks, but I did notice a ride difference. So it's all about money. But I can tell you this, if you don't care about people riding in the back and squatting it, you don't care about having that absolute perfect ride quality, an over-the-counter stock replacement cheap shock will be just fine. You sure don't want the car bouncing all to hell, with bad shocks on it. But where am I at on minutes here? 6:56, that's not too bad. Okay, I'm going to talk about rear ends. This is another thing. It's another controversial subject. I always talk about controversial subjects. Everything I'm telling you is from personal experience and the experience that I had. I'll tell you straight up, I don't like the factory rear ends. So the guy in particular I am gearing these video series here toward, he told me straight up he wants a cruiser that he can load the kids up in and get on the highway and enjoy it. He's not building a hot rod or race car. He's not going to be doing burnouts, donuts, none of that. So this is what I'm gearing this toward. If you want to go fast on a Tri-5 and do burnouts and race people and crap like that, do not do what I'm about to tell you to do. So I changed my rear ends out from these cars to 1970 to 81 Camaro Firebird Trans Am. It's second generation F-body rear ends. The reason I do that is they're just a hair wider than the factory rear. I don't remember exactly how much wider. It's not very much. I think these factory ones are like a 60-inch wide. They're just a little bit more than that. So if you've already got wide-ass wheels and tires on your car and it's almost rubbing your fender wells, you probably don't want to change it out. But if you're running a little skinny wheel and tire, you can change it out. It's the same size axle tube, which I believe is 3-inch. So it works out great for that. You do have to remove all the stuff off the Camaro stuff off the rear end with, like cut it off with a cut-off wheel and grind it clean. And then you'll have to buy a new set of perches from any of the Tri-5 suppliers. They're like $30 and weld them on. Anyway, those rear ends, now I used to do it all the time because those rear ends were around my area. A lot of them were laying around. Nowadays, they're getting kind of a little bit harder to find, but I used to pay like $100 for them. What it is, it's like an 8.5 10 bolt. Now there was all kinds of gear ratios for those cars, but the ones that I found the most were 273, 256, and 241. Now again, if you're going to want to go fast, you don't want these tall gear ratios, but if you want to get out on the turnpike and run 80, 85 miles an hour with everybody else, that's the rear end you want to go with. For cheap, for budget. Now, your drive shaft will not work. I cannot remember now. I haven't put one in quite a few years. I'm actually getting ready to do one on my cousin's 55, but I don't remember what the deal was with the drive shaft. I always have drive shafts laying around here. My shed has 7 or 8 in there. I even have a few back here. So I try to find one that's long, and then I take it and have it cut down at a shop and the U-joint changed. Because they'll cut it down, rebalance it, and change your U-joints out. And it's at my place here in Tulsa, it's like $120 or something. So that's normally what I do. If you have to have a new one made, it's more expensive. But anyway, that rear end, I love them because of the gear ratio drop. It is awesome for cruising. And I had one guy tell me a long time ago, because I actually put a 256 10 bolt in from a Camaro. I put that in the car, and the guy was like, that thing won't even take off. That's too heavy of a car for that. Well, no, it's not, because the Camaro weighs about the same amount. And the thing is, a GM engineer that's smarter than him and myself, those Camaros, like say a 79 Camaro, 350 engine, 350 turbo transmission, 10 bolt with a 256 gear. GM designed it that way. Now, there is other factors to take into account, tire height, size, and all that crap. But that is basically designed by GM, and that's why I have done it. And I can tell you this surprised me. I did a 305 with a 700 R4 overdrive in a 55 Chevy about 10 years ago, and I put a 10 bolt in it from a Camaro that had a 256 gear in it with an overdrive. And when I got out on the highway and that thing shifted into overdrive, it did not lug. It was awesome. Now, at that time when I did that, I did not have the electronic lockup, so I didn't have the lockup, which brings it down a little bit more. But, you know, usually like the old IROC Zs and stuff like that, the average gear ratio for them F-bodies, third generation F-bodies, was a 273 with a 700 R4. So anyway, that's a whole nother deal there. But I love those 10 bolts, and one of the main reasons why, every time you drag a field car 55, 6, or 7 in, it's been setting for decades, your axle seals are going to be junk. So it's going to start leaking oil when you start driving the car, and it's going to sling it all up inside your drums and it's going to contaminate your new brake shoes. You do not want to do that. So on those factory rears, you have to pull the axles out and change the bearings. The bearing and seal is one unit. So those bearings, the last time I did this, it was years ago, that bearing cost me 80 or 85 bucks per side. And they're not that fun to change. So anyway, that is why I changed to a Camaro. Again, everybody's different. If you want to go fast, have fun, do burnouts, do all kinds of drag racing and shit, go with a 9-inch. If you want to have a cruiser and upgrade and have some tall gears right off the bat, get you an F-body rear. You will not be sorry. It is kind of a bigger expense, not really budget-wise, because you can run your factory rear just fine if you're going to, you know, just enjoy it. But it seems like every 55, 6, or 7 I ever drug out of a field and got running, that rear end had a growl or a roar to it, and I hated it. I hated them things. But anyway, that is why I change out to 10 bolts from F-bodies. Anyway, guys, that's about all I'm going to cover. There's probably lots more, but that is just what I do. Again, this is more geared to a new subscriber of mine that is trying to figure out budget tips and tricks to do to his car to make it a nice driver for him and his family on the cheap. So that is just what I do. So thanks for watching. And if you can, subscribe. I'd appreciate it.